Do we all know Eva? Does anybody not know Eva? No? All right. We're going to be very happy to hear you even more about her, because she doesn't, boast about it herself. Now, she's an unabashed feminist. Now we know that, but it's great that she's unabashed, and she passionately promotes inclusive, divisive and equitable ways of living together. Her book in '96, Leading Women, explained why women who make a difference are usually labelled as difficult. Familiar? A label she wears, I assume, with pride. She was the ABC Boyer Lecturer in 1995 on making societies more civil. She's been an academic, political advisor, public servant, and runs a small research and policy consultancy. She is a sociologist by trade. She promotes ideas widely, eclectically, in books, online, in journals, and other media, which would include politics and the pub. Now, most importantly, a lot of you might not know this, Eva has been recognised in various ways. Australian Humanist of the Year, a distinguished alumnus at UNSW, and an Edna Grand Stirrer Award. And the most important one I think I had, oh yes, and she was recently honoured by being picked for a postage stamp as an Australian legend. So.
Well, I want to start, hang on, to pull this down a little bit. Whoops, gone there too far. Right here, I think it is. I want to start by saying that really one of the things that interests me about a UBI or a GMI or even a GI or a BI or whatever you want to call it, basic income, there's initials all over the place, good to say that, is because...
Peter, I think it's...
Peter, I think it's
one thing at a time.
Sorry.
Tighten that so it doesn't keep drooping on me. Reminds me of other things I don't want to think about.
Okay, let's see how that goes in.
Okay, that's fine. I want to start talking about, well, some of the basic things that I think we've got assumptions that we really need to question. I know this is difficult because people in this area don't like questioning assumptions. We actually have a very poor record on the progressive side of politics in looking at what might be called social policies. The Labour Party has done some of the nasty things. You can blame it all try and blame it all on Turnbull, but the Labour Party has got quite a bad record in some of these areas as well, even though they're not quite as nasty as the coalition government has been. Because actually we have a sort of ethos here which assumes, and I'd be interested in how many people here in the audience would feel that the object of life is to have a paid job. That unless you're a productive economic contributor, you're not really a person. And I think that's been one of the most toxic things that's happened, particularly acutely, over the last 30 or 35, 40 years under neoliberalism, when we completely lost the idea of social policies. I mean, about 15 months ago, I talked to a sociology conference as their sort of keynote speaker and pointed out to a whole lot of sort of young sociologists that when I did sociology in the 1970s, it was a discipline that government people actually went to. We talked to sociologists, political scientists, social workers, psychologists, etc., about how did you create a better society. By the time we got to the mid-80s, Pache Paul Keating, who was responsible for this, and I do not forgive him for it, we decided that neoliberalism was running. We had to actually take up the economics. The only people talk to these days are fucking economists. Pache, I know some of the audience, but it's a bit like being a Catholic priest. It can freeze your brain, but you can get over it. I'm serious about that. Economics is a very limited social science. Because it runs on the idea that it's got algorithms rather than words, people think it's actually, if you take a look at the record of the capacity of most economists to predict the future, it's very low. There's actually a very low sort of things like that. They're not very good at predicting the future, but they're very good at sort of confusing it. Unfortunately, neoliberalism deals primarily with those things which come up as part of gross domestic product, which I keep saying is A, gross, B, not domestic, and certainly not productive. Because if you think about it, what we count as part of gross domestic product is crime, because it actually creates trade and various other things, bushfires, all sorts of disasters, as well as the more sort of, if you like, productive side of things. So that really, it's not a measure of well-being, it's not a measure of individual wealth or some things like that. It's a measure of those goods which are traded. It completely leaves out unpaid work, self-production, various other things that we do, which are actually really important in terms of that there. Now, if any of you think that Marx got it any better, he didn't. Because Marx's view of the future was 8 hours work, 8 hours play, and 8 hours sleep. He forgot that then somebody had to do all of the other unpaid work of family care and domestic stuff. Obviously he had too many people around the house that were doing the housework for him. But I'm serious about the fact that the market model and the Marxist model are both materialist models, and they only deal with what is part of our material related things like that. I reckon if I asked everybody in this room and probably everybody outside and probably everybody in Western Sydney and everybody who votes for Pauline Hanson and so on, to name the things in their lives that really mattered, they would not talk about money per se. They might mention it along the way as something that can buy certain things. But it's relationships that count, it's belonging that counts. It's feeling that you're valued, it's a sense of autonomy, it's a sense of control over your world. It's a sense that you are a person connected to other people. We are social beings. So we need to remember we live in a society and not an economy. So my interest in the whole idea of UBI was that it actually can be used to generate a whole lot of discussions about what do we do, what is paid, what is work. Work is a lot of things, some of it is paid. If you actually looked, and I did a calculation recently about the time that we spend in paid work, A, you allow for the fact that people who don't have paid jobs for a whole range of reasons. B, you take a look at the people that have part-time jobs, and then you take a look at the people that have full-time jobs, and you look at those people who are so obsessed that they never go home. But you know, the thing is that it is actually a relatively small proportion of one's daily activities. Yet we are told constantly, jobs and growth, this is the only thing that counts, paid work. The excuse for the current childcare policy is to increase GDP. It's actually in the title of the bill. You know, so therefore we don't care about children, we just care about getting women into the workforce. And you get this shock horror, lack of full-time jobs. 60% of women do not work in full-time jobs, they work part-time. And we just really need to acknowledge the fact that one of the reasons they do that is they still take the primary responsibility for a lot of care things. The other one might be that they're a bit more sensible than wanting to spend all that time in the office. I've always got a theory that men who work a long time spend lots of time, so they used to have this image of things in their family in the morning where the mother drops the kids at childcare, picks up the dry cleaning, does a bit of shopping, goes to work. It's quite relieved when she gets to work, she's only got one person hassling her, leaves the place early, picks up the kids, does the shopping, cooks the dinner, you know, cleans up the house, does all of these things, and he arrives back at 8 o'clock in the evening and she says, "You've had a hard day." And whenever I tell that to people, they think about it and think, well, maybe the hard day is actually on their side, not on the men's side, because he's had 10 hours in the workforce. I just think we've got to actually get over the idea that long hours actually is A, productive, or B, validates, you know, your capacity to be a real person as opposed to other things. Yet we have this sort of dependence on the idea that everybody should get a job. One of the reasons I want to push UBI is I want to actually use it as a way of questioning it, and that's, I'm quite happy to do the things that Ben's talking about, the practicalities, because I think we'd actually need to question the idea that the focus of the world should be on your paid work, and recognise that having a proper life probably involves a balance between paid, unpaid, and creative and other sorts of activities. We sweat like hell to sort of retire. You get people talking about retirement, they put off all the things they want to do, and suddenly at the age of 68 they learn to play the trumpet. They probably would have done better learning it at the age of 21, they might have got into a jazz band. But we've got this whole thing, I hate to say this about my cohort, there's a whole lot of boring people I know who spend their lives either travelling around the world because they had no time to do it beforehand, or learning to do things that they probably should have learned a hell of a lot younger so that they actually could enjoy them for longer. Why don't we do that through our lives? Why don't we cut working hours in a way that we can actually do other things, be a good parent, be a good community person, be creative, do other things, and contribute in the paid workforce. And we could reallocate paid work so that we all work shorter hours, which actually happen to be more productive as well as long hours, if you look at the per hour productivity. Holland's got the shortest working week and the highest productivity in Europe. So I think we need to start thinking seriously about that obsession we've got with the economic productivity and the paid work. And one of the ways we can do that is by saying, if we had a universal basic income, it's got a lot of gender implications. It would actually balance off the fact that women usually do the part-time work because they take on the caring and other things and responsibilities. It would actually bump up the incomes of women who are doing the part-time work. And it would allow them to make more choices about how they allocated their time between paid and unpaid work. So we do something about the gender wage gap. And we'd also legitimise the fact that people do part-time work. At one stage I was actually suggesting maybe we should tax people if they don't do unpaid work. You know, we should actually assume that people should be doing paid work and we should tax people who don't, because they are actually not contributing as a good citizen. We need to get back to the idea that citizenship is actually a complex thing about participation, about community, about taking care of other people, about knowing your neighbours, about being creative, lots of other things there. And if you don't have time to do it, there's something wrong with it. So paying people, say, the equivalent of the age pension, would allow a lot of people to make some sort of choices about how they allocate the rest of their time. If they wanted to do 70 hours a week, they would lose most of it because it would be taxable. But you wouldn't means tested. We've got a welfare system which is appalling because of what it does to people, by the demands that it puts on it, so that we police things, so that we make sure people, only worthy people, actually get it. It's punitive, it's stigmatising, and it's also dysfunctional because it actually keeps undermining the whole idea of people feeling good enough to go out and get a job. Because by the time you jump through the hoops that Centrelink sets up with you, even if they don't send you a letter saying they owe you money, you actually feel as though you're something that's crawled out from the woodwork. You certainly don't feel somebody who's going to be confident enough to go and get a job, particularly if you get sent to lots of jobs that you're never going to get. So you get an accumulation of confusion. So we get rid of those sort of conditional things and do those things there, we can do something. So I've got a suggestion which is based on other work I've done, which I think would pair quite nicely with Ben's. I agree we should abolish the age pension. I mean, not abolish the idea of an age, give a pension, but abolish all of the tax concessions for superannuation, because they do cost more and they redistribute to the upper end of the income bracket. Why the bloody stupid trade union movement thinks it's a good idea, I haven't fathomed out yet. I've been complaining about it for years. And they're sort of deluded in the fact that they think it's a redistribution, because it's really not, in that sense. But I think there's another possibility at the moment which comes out of other work that I've done over the last few years, because I work at Jumbana, which is the Indigenous research type thing. And I think we've done some of the nastiest things around welfare, which again never get discussed, which is this idea of the basics card and this other thing called the cashless welfare card, which has got another name I can't think of at the moment, cashless credit card or whatever it is, which is currently being piloted because it was a good idea by Twiggy Forrest, you know, who's a millionaire, knows so much about the poor, that it would be a good idea to take 80% of people's income and put it on the cashless card rather than the 50%, which is the Northern Territory Basics card. We've had 10 years now, this year, of the Basics card in some communities in the Northern Territory, particularly the 72 isolated communities that were originally picked up for the intervention. In that time, they've not only not been able to sort of spend their money freely, only 50% of it, but they've also had other sorts of constraints about what they spend it on. They've only been able to spend it in certain types of shops. And most recently, they've also been pushed into a work for the dole thing if they happen to be not working age thing, which is cruel and really savage and absolutely abominable. Yet, once upon a time, before we had the intervention and before Howard abolished it, we had a program called the CDEP, which was a form of payment to Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory and in other places, which was used to provide activities which were jobs that were needed within the community. There were ceremonies, they were caring for country, there were a lot of things which people felt good about doing and wanted to do, and they worked very well. Yes, there were a few areas where they were ripped off, and Howard used that as an excuse for getting rid of the project. but there's quite a few evaluations which showed that CDEP was working, and when the intervention came and the whole thing was destroyed, they actually destroyed all of the local services that were being developed under CDEP and the jobs that went with them, and they made it a mess. The Basics card has been evaluated, including by the University of New South Wales, with $1 million evaluation, turned up a large amount of data which showed, according to their best efforts, they tried really hard to find something positive since they're subcontractors to the government who was tried. They could not actually find a single item on which it actually showed improvements. They found some people that liked it because they managed their money, but there were many people on what's called voluntary income management, not on compulsory income management. Despite all of that, they're now trying the cashless welfare card in the Ceduna in South Australia and in the Kimberleys in Western Australia, and the government has obviously decided it works even though there's no data to show it is working, and they've managed to confuse the trials completely because at the same time they introduced the trials, they introduced a different way of administering it, which involved the local community, which again changed the way, instead of having it all administered out of Canberra. And they also put services in for people who've got alcohol and other problems into the same communities. So at the end of 12 months, they've got Buckley's chance of working out whether it was the card itself that improved any behaviour, if any improvements do occur. So we've got a system which is sort of back into the dark ages and treating people, infantilising them and treating them like idiots, which isn't working. So we have the ideal opportunity to offer the opposite. So I'm suggesting, and I'd like anybody who happens to be a member of a political party, I assume we don't have any coalition members, but if you're a Green or an ALP person, slide out on them, which is that we should run a trial in the Northern Territory and in some of the other areas like Bankstown and Shepparton and so on, where they also ran trials with the Basic card, with the same group of people who've been persecuted with this other system for varying periods depending when the trial started in their area. And we should actually offer them an unconditional payment, which is the same as what they're getting now, or maybe slightly more because we wouldn't have all the admin costs. And we should give them at least 3 or 4 years to get over the shock that they are actually treated like adults and in control of their own money. And we should provide them with some additional resources for the communities, particularly in the Northern Territory, which might be useful for generating some of the projects that they want to generate there. And at the end of the time, we can compare the effects of it. We know the first lot doesn't work. We might find the second lot does. I just want to refer back. I don't know how many people here actually heard the Boyle lectures last year with Michael Marmot.
I did, yeah, well, that marvellous.
Michael Marmot sort of was talking about the fact, was the fact that the health inequalities throughout the world are identifiably caused by people's inequalities, sense of inequality. It's not actually necessarily the access to health services, but it's a sense of whether or not you have a sense of control over your life, a sense of agency, a sense of being respected, a sense of being valued. And that does tend to go often with financial inequalities as well, because there are so many of them deeply unjust. And he said, good health depends on getting rid of that sense of inequality which drives people to feel that they're useless, almost, and everything else. We need to get rid of the welfare system, which is doing the same. We can save money by doing so because it costs them a fortune in the administration and organisation and policing of the current system. So it mightn't even cost any extra to what we've got already. And maybe at the end of the 3 years of that, and picking up some of Ben's suggestions, we can prove that both to deal with gender issues and Indigenous issues, because we keep having the same problems with the closing the gap stuff, so it's a very good argument there. And looking at other issues of poverty, we might be able to show that if you treat people humanly, if you value their contribution, whether it happens to be social or financial, and if you create some goodwill in the community about the fact that there's lots of different ways of contributing to the social good, we might end up with a better Australia.
Thank you very much.